Okay, so I wanted to show you our explode node. Um, and I also wanted to mention that we don't necessarily need to start a um, with any geometry to make a mesh network. We can just create a mesh network and nothing appears in the scene. But if I choose this option here, which is to add points, which is a way to visualize the mesh network without having any geometry attached to it. So let me just go ahead and add a point node. And what I see here is that this mesh network is made up of points that are numerically valued, and then all of the calculations and simulations within our procedural mesh network affect each of these numbered points. And then if we make an instance of a geometry, then it's placing that geometry at these points. But for the explode node, I don't necessarily need to have that geometry. I can just have these points and look at these points this way. And I also don't need the point ID. I can just maybe say 3D points to visualize, just to see where these points are located. And if I go to let's go to my mesh distribute and put it in maybe in a sphere. And I'm going to, I think 10 points is fine for now. Because what I need in order to explode something is a piece of geometry that will break apart into its different all of its faces, and those faces will be attracted to these different points. So I'm going to go now and I'm going to create some geometry, and maybe I'll just make a sphere. And actually, you might have noticed that I have, in my last video, I had this too, I guess, but I have this data here. If I go up to display and heads up display, I'm able to choose different bits of information that I want displayed in my viewport. And I've turned on this poly count. So display, heads up display, and poly count has been turned on. And this tells me here how many faces I have on this sphere. So it tells me the selection, tells me in the whole scene, and I only have one piece of geometry in my scene. And it tells me how many vertices I have, how many faces I have, etc. So here I have 400 faces to my sphere. And that is helpful if I'm going to explode this. If I want to explode this sphere to these points, I want to make sure I have a point per face. So I'm going to go back to my mesh network, mesh distribute, and say 400 points. And I might actually make this radius even bigger. Maybe I'll make it at 50. Okay. And now when I go to my mesh node and I add an explode node, of course nothing will happen initially because I need to connect an exploding mesh. Okay, so what I'll do is I will take my sphere, and I don't want to left mouse click, I want to right mouse click. Middle mouse click, excuse me. So I want to middle mouse over my sphere and drop it into this exploding mesh. And now the mesh has been already exploded out. So again, nothing is necessarily happening. So what I want to do is also introduce some keyframing here, right? So my strength, after I've added my mesh to the explode node, I want to go down to strength. And if I bring this back down to 0, and let's set a key at frame 1, and then jump ahead maybe to frame 20 and increase that strength to 1 and set key. Now we can see, and when I press play, that this sphere has exploded out to all of the points. Okay, so that's how explode node works. And I did want to show you, if I want to see this particular, I tried to do this in a previous video with color, I think it was, and I wasn't able to look at the map in the graph editor, but this, this method does work here and in other places to be able to see the keys that I've set in my graph editor within attributes of something. So if I select this and then I go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, right? here's my strength and the way it's been graphed. So you can't necessarily, so let me just go back here. I'm going to actually embed this graph editor quickly right here underneath my viewport. Let me take this, let's see it again. Go back to the beginning, right? Maybe if I stretch this out a bit, let me zoom out. If it's a little bit longer of a timeline, you can really see how it eases in, right? I don't necessarily, like an exploding motion doesn't ease in and out of the explosion. I might want to click here and change these tangents so that we have a more violent kind of explosion, right? Maybe that's a little too much. Maybe tamp that down a little bit. But this is a way that you can adjust the curves of attributes that you've adjusted and that you've keyframed. So anything you've keyframed, if you select it, although color for some reason doesn't seem to work right, but or I wasn't able to visualize that in the graph editor, but I know there's a way to do it. But anyway, or I think there is. I might be thinking of a different program. Anyhow, this is the way that you can, right? You can view in the graph editor and make those micro adjustments, or even, change. I don't want it to be, let's pull this back out again so I see all of my options, right? I don't want it to be a kind of curve. I want it to, I don't want the tangents. I'll select everything here and make that a linear curve so that the motion, the velocity stays constant. Okay, so that's the explode node. We'll get into one or two more nodes for this week.